Kia ora team, Chris Farhi here. Hey look, last month I did a quick vlog looking at some of the interesting news in New Zealand real estate. Got some really good feedback, so yeah, figured I'd do it again. Alright, so look, first some news relating to the Reserve Bank. So if you've been watching the news over the past month or two, you would have seen the Reserve Bank's been taking an increasing amount of flack about the role of low interest rates in fueling the housing crisis. And so a couple of things happened this month. So the first was the Reserve Bank announced that it would be reintroducing the LVR restrictions on property investors that it had put in place prior to COVID. And so from March 2021, LVR restrictions will increase to 30% for investors, and then from May 2021 they'll increase back up to 40%. And so in fairness, this probably isn't that huge of a deal because a lot of the banks had already put the restrictions in place voluntarily prior to the announcements. And so the second bit of news relating to this is actually a bit more interesting. And look, I'm gonna have to look at my screen because it's a little bit technical. And so basically the Minister of Finance gave the Reserve Bank a formal direction in relation to its inflation targeting process. And so the direction requires the Monetary Policy Committee to assess the effect of its monetary policy decisions on the government's policy to support more sustainable house prices. So look, this one's pretty interesting because there's a mixed opinion as to what this means. So the first school of thought is that the idea of sort of assessing the impact is actually not that big of a deal, and the Reserve Bank will just continue with its inflation targeting and supporting maximum sustainable employment, in which case the actual impact of that change won't be that humongous. So that's the first school of thought. And so the second contrasting school of thought is that this will actually translate to higher interest rates in the long run as the Reserve Bank starts to push up interest rates in order to control house price inflation. And so the second school of thought was actually apparent in the day or two after the announcements, where long-term government bond rates actually bumped up a bit in anticipation of that sort of effect. And so honestly, don't really know where this one will head at the moment as to whether it is just an administrative type of thing or if it will have a material effect. But I think anyone who's investing in property should monitor this particular issue because it could be quite important. Next up, the government announced that it's replacing the Resource Management Act with 3 new pieces of legislation. So I'll just check my cheat sheet. So that's the Natural and Built Environment Act, the Strategic Planning Act, and the Climate Change Adaptation Act. And so this is potentially a big one because the Resource Management Act has for many years been blamed for restrictions around the delivery of large projects, and I guess in more recent years specifically around large-scale housing projects. And so it'll be interesting as to whether these changes in legislation make a meaningful impact on the ability to kind of more quickly and more cheaply undertake development. And so there's a little bit of uncertainty at the moment because no one's seen the legislation, so they don't actually know what it will mean for the industry. But I guess a lot of people are hopeful that it will streamline development. So in terms of timeframes, the government's indicated that it will be the end of 2021 before we see the Strategic Planning Act or the Climate Change Adaptation Act, and that the Natural and Built Environment Act will take until the end of 2022. And it's actually that latter one which will be of most interest to people involved in vertical construction. So everyone in the sector is pretty hopeful that the new legislation will streamline development and allow us to do bigger and better projects. But I guess the haters out there are saying, oh, you know, 3 pieces of legislation where there used to be 1. So yeah, look, we'll wait and see on that one really. So look, in case anyone in government is watching, on my wish list would be to prevent ugly buildings. So although the industry delivers some really stunning and beautiful buildings, there's also a lot of really shit buildings out there. So look, if we can do something to maybe prevent ugly buildings, maybe a little subclause 40B, do not build ugly buildings, that would be super cool. So then moving into corporate real estate, so Vodafone announced that they'll be subleasing half of their office space in Christchurch and in Auckland. And so this is a pretty big one, but basically builds off of remote working trends off the back of the lockdowns. And so Vodafone has commented that their staff are basically continuing to work from home with sort of 50 to 60% of staff in the office on any one day. And so they're taking the opportunity to reduce their office footprint. And so their next step will be basically heading to market to find tenants to take the space. So I'll be really interested to see which tenants jump into some of those buildings. Continuing on corporate real estate, but into the supply side, Asset Plus announced that they're recommencing the redevelopment process for 35 Graham Street in central Auckland. So this is a pretty cool one. If you walked over to 35 Graham Street at the moment, so it's offices for Auckland Council, and so over the past couple of years they've been going really hard to reduce their footprint in terms of office space, and basically looking to do that to increase benefits for staff in terms of flexibility, reduce costs and improve their environmental footprint. And so as part of that process, 35 Graham Street has been divested, purchased by Asset Plus, who in turn plan to redevelop it into a really cool office building. So the renders that they've released look really cool, and that location's doing really well with different government tenants moving into the area, a lot of corporate tenants moving in. So just next door you've got Fidelity, 2 Degrees, Meredith Connell moving into 136 Fanshawe Street. So yeah, should do well. So this also shows, I guess, the mixed trends in the office market. So on the one hand you've got some corporate occupiers reducing their footprints, and then on the other hand you've got tenants moving into nice new shiny buildings. And I think for me it's the fact that with remote working, people are working from home, and so the office is almost competing against the house. And so if you want to build your organisational culture, mentoring and things like that, you need people in the office. And so in order to do that you need some really cool office space. And so we're seeing this definite flight to quality. Cool buildings remain in good demand, but then shitty buildings, are going to find it harder over the coming years. So moving south to Wellington, Willis Bond announced that they're acquiring the old Ag Research facility in Wallaceville Upper Hutt, and they're intending to create a 40,000 square metre commercial development. And so this one has a really cool name, the Blue Mountains Campus. And so what they're doing is a series of low-rise buildings set in like a park environment. So Willis Bond commented that they're looking to basically help people to work closer to home and to also create a resilient location in case a natural hazard like an earthquake was to occur. And so I'm pretty excited about this one. So I've done quite a bit of work in Wellington over the past couple of years for corporate headquarters and things like that. And the idea of having a really attractive and modern environment outside of the CBD I think is very exciting. So that was some of the interesting news from the past month. If you thought this was interesting, then drop me an email and I'll chuck you on the notification list for the Week in Real Estate that I publish twice a week, where I talk about news like this. And otherwise, if you just thought the video was cool, go ahead, smash that like button. Cheers, bye.